Welcome to USC Trojans Primetime Live. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ethan Inman, talking to you about USC football. And of course, it's a new day of the week for our show. It's Thursday. So during the rest of the summer, you can find us on Thursdays. Still 10 Eastern, 7 p.m. out in Los Angeles and the rest of the Pacific time zone. But yeah, we've moved to Thursday as we announced last week, and we are going to be taking your calls. And so in the chat, you'll notice there's the StreamYard link. Ethan and I are going to kick things around for about 20 minutes or so, and then we are going to be taking your calls. We'll just pull you up here on StreamYard here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. So Ethan, as we get started and we do our opening segment before fielding calls and comments from our viewers and listeners, you noticed a tweet from Sua Cravens that really pricked your antenna. And obviously, so like, we're not creating this. Sua Cravens did. And he attaches some meaning to that. And also, they're it's not just a callback to the past, but it's also a comparison with the present. Take it away, Ethan.
All right, let me see if I can pull this up on StreamYard. Let's see. Here we go. So it's this tweet from Sua Cravens. He posted it earlier today. He said, "Woke up wondering what could have been had Pat Hayden kept his word and hired Coach O after that 2013 season. We cried like babies before the bowl game when he told us he wasn't coming back. We were all in on Edo. I still remember after we finished camp my freshman year, he had a Cajun food truck pull up to practice and serve fried catfish and shrimp po' boys with a side of seafood gumbo and had our nutritionist furious." He kind of continues on that. And then he says, "But I'm getting similar vibes from this current USC team, staff, and recruiting class. You can feel the energy and swag coming back to campus. New strength and conditioning coach setting a physical standard. New front office personnel making moves all offseason long. The California recruiting fence is alive and well. The Trojans are set up with a chance to do double-digit wins the next 2 seasons and make their first ever playoff appearance. I cannot wait to see it all unfold." So obviously a lot to unpack here, Matt. Some notes, both positive and negative, both about USC's past and USC's future. I know it stood out to me. I'm just curious, first and foremost, though, what stands out to you most about this tweet here?
It is an interesting time to make the Coach O callback, and I think there are lots of layers to this, as you yourself alluded to. I think one of the things is that USC administratively has things lined up properly, and one thing we can definitely say is that under Pat Hayden, things were not lined up properly. So I think that's the especially good point. In terms of litigating Coach O, that's a different deal. Because Ed Orgeron, obviously he has a national championship, and so just for that reality, he greatly exceeded everyone's expectations at LSU. But Joe Burrow kind of fell into his lap. This was before NIL and the portal had the dynamics that they do today. Coach O was fortunate in that regard. Now, he didn't screw it up, to his credit, but still, Joe, you get Joe Burrow, that is it's not as though Coach O engineered that, but nevertheless, he did win a national title. So, to me, looking at Ed Orgeron before and after Burrow, that was a real mess at LSU, and it does lead me to wonder how well everything would have worked out at USC. And of course, the other thing we have to say is that I wasn't necessarily firmly pro Coach O or firmly anti. My deal back then, not that anyone was paying attention to anything I said. I was still writing for College Football News back in 2013. But my sense was, okay, if it's not Ed Orgeron, what's the alternative? I think that was the relative, the appropriate question to ask then, and it's still the appropriate question to ask now. And so, coming up with Steve Sarkisian, at a time when he had not really mastered the finer arts of coaching. That like when Sark was hired, I thought, oh no, this is not good, and it didn't turn out to be good. Now, of course, why it didn't turn out to be good was not necessarily a football thing, right? Because Steve Sarkisian's problem back then was not football; it was a bottle, and his bout with alcoholism. But nevertheless, Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian were both hired as USC head coaches before they had proven themselves as head coaches. And we've seen both Sark and Kiffin get better after, going to the Nick Saban rehab facility in Tuscaloosa. And Kiffin in particular, like he needed a group of 5 jobs, such as what he had at Florida Atlantic, to just spend your time in the salt mines. You learn how to be a head coach without the withering pressure. Like that should have been the progression, and then after Sark and Kiffin both went through those progressions, then you hire them as head coach. A lot of Los Angeles sports fans will remember the brief and ill-fated tenure of Luke Walton as Laker head coach. Luke Walton has some talent as a basketball coach, but like you don't take over the Lakers at the very beginning. Not unless you're like a Brad Stevens prodigy who, again, has already proven something as a head coach. If you're a young coach, you need to be proven. All right, that's the thing. Like you don't have to take the Laker job in your 30s, right? Spend some years at the lower level. Be the coach of the Hornets. Be the coach of a mid-level team like the Atlanta Hawks or something. Spend your time in the salt mines. Learn how to be a coach in the league. Gather information, and then when you turn like 48 or 50 or 52. Then there might be the opening to be the coach of the Lakers, and you will be ready for the job in all of its dimensions, in all of its details. So the comparison's obvious, right? Sark and Kiffin both, when they were both brought aboard at USC in the early 2010s, they weren't ready. And so, if that's the comparison we make, yes, Ed Orgeron would have been better. He would have been better than Sark and Kiffin at that point in time. But of course, why are you limiting your options? And of course, and let me just pop this up from Logan Dowell here, Pat Hayden could have hired Chris Peterson. Now, Chris Peterson seems to have been pretty consistent and pretty adamant about saying, I don't want to coach in the big lights. I don't want to coach in a huge media market where the scrutiny is withering. But to be absolutely fair to Logan here, USC could have made a bigger full court press, could have tried to convince Peterson, could have made a bigger, tougher run at him. For sure, the Trojans could have done that instead of what they plainly and obviously did. They settled. They wanted to keep someone in the family. I saw that Sua Cravens in like the replies to his tweet, people were saying, why didn't Coach O get hired? And Sua Cravens just very simply said, politics. So like that was the mess that was going on at USC. But I think, before people get into that, just that binary, well, should it have been Coach O or should it not have been Coach O? Reasonable question, but it really kind of misses the bigger picture, which was that, the weighing of alternatives and the other decisions USC made in the Pat Hayden era, like USC did not consider its options. USC did not go for a proven guy first. Like if USC went for a rock star and couldn't land the plane, couldn't nail the rock star hire, and Orgeron was like a third or a fourth choice, keeping in mind that Pete Carroll was Mike Garrett's fourth choice in the year 2000, that would hit different, right? If Ed Orgeron was the coach, but he was like a fourth choice, then you say, okay, like the process was still sound. But USC's process, I think 100% of us can agree, USC's process was not sound. And so that's certainly something to point out for Sua Craven's tweet. Ethan?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the things you said, Matt. I think the process is obviously the thing that's the mess here. You made a good point about how you can't really have confidence in Coach O at that point in time. I mean, we can sit here in 2025 and our hindsight is that he won a national championship. So our mindset now is a lot different than it was back in the day, when Sua Cravens was in a USC uniform instead of commentating sideline at USC football games now like he does now. But I just think that if we're, relitigating the past a little bit, the bigger mess is, with some of the false promises that were made to the players. I think it doesn't really work very well building trust with the players if you kind of promise them that this well-liked coach is coming back and then he doesn't end up coming back. It's probably something that had a lot less consequences back in the day, but I can't even imagine if you did that in the current era with NIL and how easy it is to transfer. Like if you told a group of players that you were trying to keep around that their coach was staying and then their coach didn't stay, like it would just be a mass exodus and it would be not a good look for the university at all. So that kind of stuff. You mentioned the politics reply in the comments, all kind of a mess. But I'm also glad that Sua pointed out some of the positive things that are going on. I think it's really interesting that he highlighted that he's really liking what he's seeing from the strength and conditioning coach, because obviously that was a very recent hire. So USC football fans don't really know too much about what's gone on since USC hired Tremaine Carroll and what kind of job he's been doing, since it was just a couple of months ago now that he was hired. So I think it's a really positive sign that Sua Cravens, called him out specifically and was like, what Tremaine Carroll is doing is good so far. He's setting a new physical standard. This was the good move that USC needed to make in that department. So I'm really encouraged about that. The stuff about the front office and the recruiting fences, things that all of us fans know. So it's not, nothing crazy revelatory there. But then he makes a really bold statement there at the bottom: double-digit wins the next 2 seasons, which means he's decently confident in USC's ability this season, which, they don't have the strongest schedule and they have some decent returning players at key positions. So I don't see it as entirely impossible that they achieve that, but it's still kind of a bold take considering it's a team that just went 7-6 and, hasn't won double-digit wins in a couple of years and hasn't gotten to double-digit wins consistently in quite a while. So I think it's a bold take, but, obviously a take that USC fans will be excited about. So, and, make their first playoff appearance as well. He seems pretty confident that that's going to happen. So I hope that all of that comes true. Obviously, every USC fan hopes that comes true, but a couple little interesting bits of insight there from Sua, I think. So, yeah, with the strength and conditioning coach being the main one, I'm glad that he thinks that that's going well.
Yeah, I mean, like that, again, lots of layers here. It really is interesting that Sua Cravens would focus on the new strength of conditioning coach, setting a new standard. I mean, he's not even 2 months into his job. He is just getting started. And it just strikes me. Not to say or imply that Sua Cravens is wrong in any way, that what he's seeing, what he's hearing, is not somehow legitimate, but it is just interesting to make that strong an observation this early in the game. I mean, don't we need to see preseason camp? Again, not saying that Sua is wrong, but just, wow, that's an early call, right? It's like saying that, Pennsylvania is going to the Democrat at 10:30 on election night. That's an early call, right? Don't you want to wait until you get more precincts reporting, right? So it's just striking how early a declaration this is. Again, it could be right, but we need to see camp. We need to see how this team goes through games. And Missouri State, Georgia Southern, probably not going to learn a ton from those 2 games. Getting into the Big Ten and specifically getting into Big Ten road games in September, which of course was the thing that tripped up USC most centrally last season. Let's see where we are in late September, early October as kind of our first real measuring stick for where Tremaine Carroll has this team in terms of strength, durability, resilience, stamina, all those things. I mean, hey, no one needs to tell me of all people that I'm thrilled that Tremaine Carroll's here, because it means Benny Wiley is out of here, which is something that I was wanting for a very long time. It's and I've said, Ethan, on our show several weeks ago, I'm sold on Tremaine Carroll. I believe in Coach Carroll at USC. And of course, how can you not trust Coach Carroll at USC. It's just all too perfect. But really, no, I mean, Kansas State is a skull crusher program, not in terms of being number one, but in terms of punch you in the mouth, right? Physical, hit you hard. That's how they play. That's how they roll. They've done really well. So like his credentials, his identity, like I'm sold. I'm a believer, but I do need to see it on the field. And the other thing is, even if Trumaine Carroll really is the guy, and I do think he is, this still feels like an in-between type season. And I do think, again, that he was brought aboard now, not so much for 2025, though, of course, he is. Like, he's going to be part of this operation in 2025. But I really think that he was hired when he was so that he can lay a foundation, establish a standard, a modus operandi, that leads into 2026 so that that number one recruiting class can see what's going on, can see how it's being done. Like they didn't want a holdover and someone who represented mediocrity and stagnation. They get the right guy in so that the number one recruiting class can see how this guy goes about his business, and then the veterans in the locker room can kind of hand down the nuances of Trumaine Carroll's new strength and conditioning program to the incoming freshmen, the incoming recruits. I think that was a big part of the thought process from Chad Bowden and Lincoln Riley when they made that move. So like how much Trumaine Carroll can actually achieve in specifically for the 2025 season alone, he could be the guy, and yet we still might not see the full results on the field. And I think that's going to be one of the really delicate and difficult conversations about 2025 USC football, Ethan. It's that this is an in-between year. The needle is definitely going in the right direction, but really 2026 is where the real energy and the optimism and the vibe shift are all truly happening. It's not really about this year's team. And so we have to go to the reminder into the past that in 2001, Pete Carroll very much did turn around USC, but it was the beginning of the turnaround. The beginning of the turnaround was in 2001, when the culture, the identity, the attitude, the approach, they all did change, but only as a table setter for 2002, the breakout year. So like that to me, Ethan, is really the difficult conversation at USC right now. It's that the results in 2025 might not be great, and we have to be savvy enough to be able to see whether the culture really is changing, providing that springboard for 2026, or whether it's Lincoln Riley not making the grade and continuing to hold this program back.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that, your note about it's a really early claim to make for sure about the strength coach. But I think also you mentioned something there about kind of the culture. And even if this season isn't the results oriented season, it is a season where the culture needs to start being set. And so that's what makes me think that it's a good sign that Sue is saying this, because the results may not show up like you said, but if Sua feels like there's at least a culture and an expectation that's being set this early, which I don't think it's crazy to say, when you hire a new coach, you want them to come and start implementing their new culture on day one. The players aren't going to change on day one, but you want the coach to start facilitating that change on day one. And that's something that I do a lot of coverage for the Raiders for the other site that I write for. And there's a lot of talk about how Pete Carroll has immediately stepped in and changed the culture there. And that's another thing, kind of similar thing, to Coach Carroll's changing the culture. But even though, people aren't expecting the Raiders to be Super Bowl contenders the minute that Pete Carroll steps into the building, they still, what they are expecting is for him to kind of bring that positive energy and that, very signature Pete Carroll energy that he's always brought to the sideline on day one. So I think that that's something that, we should watch for. Is it may not be consistent and it may not be, to the standard that USC fans want to see, but I think, pay close attention to how players celebrate their big physical wins. Like if Jamal Jarrett or Jakeem Stewart makes like a big exciting play on the defensive line, and then they go and celebrate with Tremaine Carroll, and it's clear that they're celebrating those big physical wins, that's something positive, and that's the culture setting that we want to see. So I'd pay a little bit of attention to that for sure. And then I think that that's kind of my thoughts on that. I had something else that I was going to say, but it slipped my mind.
Okay, well, you'll regather it. I think one other little layer to add here is that, I said that, in late September when USC goes on the road in the Big Ten, we'll begin to get a sense of where this team is going, and perhaps we might get our first glimpses of how rugged and physically robust USC might be in the Big Ten, and whether Tremaine Carroll's new regimen is making a real difference. I think the other point to stack on top of that is injuries. And it's really interesting that the injuries began to hit USC last season precisely when it got into the Big Ten schedule. The Michigan game, the Wisconsin game, the Minnesota game, there was a tidal wave of injuries. Eric Gentry out against Wisconsin. Anthony Lucas out in the second half against Minnesota. Minnesota's offense got better right after Anthony Lucas got hurt in that particular game. So, it was obvious that those were the linchpins. Those were the key foundational pieces of that defense, and USC plainly did not have the elite depth needed to withstand those particular losses. So another measurement of Tremaine Carroll. And again, I'm not going to hold him to an extremely high standard this season because, again, he's putting things in place. Like, you have to give, for a strength and conditioning coach, you have to give him at least a couple years to measure what he's been able to do. Like we saw with Benny Wiley that he wasn't cutting it. Like Benny Wiley had been with Lincoln Riley for several seasons. So like that ship had sailed, like that story had run its course. Like I had seen enough. I had seen all I needed to see. But with Tremaine Carroll, you have to give him some runway. You have to give him an on-ramp to really see what he's capable of. So I'm not going to judge him too harshly if this season doesn't hit all the marks. But just in terms of trying to make the measurement of Tremaine Carroll, if this team does get hit by injuries, how the depth pieces are able to step up, and particularly in terms of run defense, and particularly in terms of filling the middle and doing the kinds of no glory things that you need on a football team and you need on a defense, like that would be the next measurement. So it's not just getting into the Big Ten schedule, particularly in Big Ten road games, and particularly in colder weather as we go along late in the season. We also just have to ask the question, if there are injuries, are the next guys going to be ready to punch up? Are they going to be able to hold their weight in the arena? Are they going to be able to stand strong, tough, and tall? That will be another measurement for Tremaine Carroll in his first year at USC.
I think I remembered my other thought, Matt, which was just that.
I hope I gave you enough time with that answer. Yeah, good.
Which is just that if you want to keep an eye on Tremaine Carroll's development this year, definitely keep an eye on Jakeem Stewart. He's kind of, USC's big 5-star prospect this year, kind of the darling of the 2025 class, the guy that is, it's not like we have nobody in this 2025 class and we're waiting and everybody's in the 2026 class. He's kind of the guy in the 2025 class that will kind of keep us excited and hold us over until those 2026 guys come in. But I mean, he's 6'6", 270 pounds. We've already seen him working out with Aaron Donald through the Coach Henny connection. So if you want to, kind of psychoanalyze Tremaine Carroll's development a little early, because as I know USC fans love to jump to judgments as soon as they possibly can. But if that's what you want to keep your eye on, then just focus in on Jakeem Stewart, because he's kind of the main key guy that the development really matters for. Obviously, some of these upperclassmen, keeping them on the field, that's another important thing, like you mentioned with the injuries. But in terms of development specifically, keep your eye on Jakeem Stewart for sure.
All right, folks. So, we've posted the link at the bottom of the screen, the StreamYard link. You can click there and you can get inside the show. You can talk to us, ask some questions. So Ethan and I are going to continue our conversation. But first, a word from our sponsor here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. We'll see you in 1 minute.
You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link. Financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. Same shopping experience. It's easy. Go to any video on any channel. Go to the description section and grab the link right next to the capital letters that say Amazon. Use that link and Amazon will instantaneously convert to your account, settings, history, everything intact, just like whatever link you use right now. No difference. Pay no attention to the product that you see right there. Just go search what you want. Don't forget the Amazon link. Thank you for your support. Sincerely, the Voice of College Football.
So Mark Rogers is the voice of college football, and just on the heels of that, want to mention that, on our website, vocfb.com, we are spending the summer making sure that you get to look at all the different school-specific broadcasts here at the Voice of College Football. We just debuted a new school show, South Carolina, with its premiere episode, like USC Trojans Primetime Live. We've been going for multiple years here, but we have a new school that just debuted, and other schools are just like in their first 10 to 15 episodes. So we're promoting all these shows. We're posting the YouTube links to all of them. So that's at our website, vocfb.com. You get to it's an easy way to access all our content from all our contributors, all our show hosts. You want to support Ethan, you want to support myself, you want to support our friends at Conquest Chronicles Live, the other USC show here at the Voice of College Football, but also just the full network. And Mark has his national college football show every weekday at 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific. You can get a look at that. So all across the map, go to vocfb.com, find your favorite show, find shows of your rivals, other teams, other schools that you're interested in, just, like you love college football. So if you want to study up on dozens of teams, you can just go to vocfb.com. That's the written website here at the Voice of College Football. All right, Ethan, so as we continue, and again, if you click on the StreamYard link, you should be able to get into the show. One other thing from the Sua Cravens tweet. So you alluded to this, but let's kind of unpack it a little more, right? Like, this is June. These are the talking points that Sua put out on the table. So he said, decent chance of double-digit wins the next 2 seasons. So, hey, like, we are all praying for 10-2. Like, you say 10-2 right now, we're all signed on the dotted line here at USC. Zero question about that. We would take it in a second, because that 10-2 in the Big Ten almost certainly means a ticket to the college football playoff. Well, so we'd love that. We're hoping for that, of course. But can USC actually get there? And Sua, in his enthusiasm and his passion, his love for USC, man, is he driving that talking point just a little bit prematurely? Because don't we need to see something first? And I think, Ethan, the question is, like a lot of people in and around the program would look at this schedule and say, it's not the most intimidating schedule, right? And you don't have Ohio State on it. You don't have Penn State on it. So, like, the schedule does offer a certain window of opportunity. But I think even most USC fans would probably say, you know what? Like, I would love 10-2. I would pay money to go 10-2. Like, if it cost me $1,000 for USC to go 10-2, yeah, I'd probably cough up that amount of coin for the Trojans to make the playoff. Like, it would be that much. It would be worth it to that extent. But is this team really ready? I think even the most optimistic folks are probably in the camp of, like, in the 9-3, 8-4 range. How close do you think USC actually is to being 10-2? Purely in terms of the schedule, we can all, chop it up pretty easily. There are 9 games USC is supposed to win, and then it's a matter of winning 1 out of the 3, Michigan, Oregon, Notre Dame. So in your mind, how close really is USC football to being a 10-2 team?
I think there's a comment in the chat that's really kind of important here, which is that our quarterback play will go in a long way in determining whether we go 10-2. Absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, we were going into a similar situation with scheduling just a few short years ago in 2022, and Caleb Williams played a massive role into carrying us to our season where we had one regular season loss and then ended up losing the Pac-12 title game and then throwing the bowl game away at the end. But that season doesn't happen without Caleb Williams. We're very much a mediocre team without him. Quarterback play is always important. I think at this year at USC, it's even more important than it would be, any given year for any other team, just because there's a lot of potential on the offense. But I think that, and I think the defense will be solid enough that the offense will be in position to win games if it can play well. But I just think that the offensive weapons potential needs to be unlocked by a quarterback that can make good decisions, that can get the ball in the hands of the right guys, that can find the open man, all that kinds of stuff. Because, it's not like we have 2019 LSU on offense. There's a lot of guys who, came out of high school or are coming out of JUCO or the place where they just came from or have been at USC for a bit that have shown a lot of potential. I could name 5, 6, 7 guys on the USC offense that I all think could be potential stars, from Mekhi Lemon to Jacoby Lane to Wayman Jordan to, even guys like Brian Jackson or, transfers like Prince Strachan who've shown just a little bit of having that kind of juice at their previous schools or even at USC. But I do think the quarterback play is going to matter a lot. But also not to the point where we need to put it on Jayden Maiava's shoulders that he needs to be Caleb Williams. He's obviously not Caleb Williams. If he can develop into Caleb Williams, that would be incredible. He didn't show who he was last year for sure. He made a lot of really questionable mistakes and, showed some raw talent on some plays, but, showed some really bad decision making on others. So he doesn't need to do it all himself. He should, feel very much comfortable with handing the ball off. The running back room is really deep this year. Obviously, we can't just run the ball and hand the ball off and have him run up the middle every time. We need to kind of have Lincoln Riley get into his element play calling and running some different looks with the run game. But I do think that the quarterback play is going to be really important. But actually, let me pull up the schedule here because I have it in another tab just real quick. Hold on.
When you got the 2 cupcakes first, and if you're about to make a comment, go ahead. But if not, I'm going to ask you a question.
I was just going to pull it up. Oh, here we go. I was missing it I was just going to pull it up so our viewers could see it here on the channel. But I do think that, like you said, you look at the schedule, I think USC should be favored in 9 of these games. Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, Michigan State. Illinois is a little bit more in the middle, I think, just because of how good they were, especially early season last year. But I do think USC is favored in that game. Nebraska, Northwestern, pretty clearly after what USC did in Nebraska last year. Northwestern they moved the game to Friday night, so that tells you all you need to know. Iowa and then UCLA. And that leaves, like you said, the Oregon game, the Notre Dame game, and the am I missing one? Maybe the Illinois is kind of 50-50. But I think that the problem isn't going to be those more competitive games, because I think USC showed their ability to be more competitive last year. I mean, they had a lot of bad breaks, a lot of bad moments in kind of the closing moments of games that, they lost like 4 or 5 games that they could have won within the last few minutes. I mean, the only game that they were really out of at any point was the Notre Dame game. And even in that game, I remember it being the 4th quarter and feeling like USC still had a legitimate shot to win the game. It would take, a supreme effort by Jayden Maiava and the rest of the group to have won that game. But it still felt like they had hung around enough that it was possible, at least. So I think I could see a scenario where USC goes into a game that they're not favored to win and they win the game. And USC fans are, they're thrilled. They feel like this is the year we're making the college football playoffs. Stuart Cravens was right. All that kind of stuff. And then they go into a game on the road that they're supposed to win, or even a game at home. The road provided the main problems for them last year, but even at home, maybe they welcome. I missed the Michigan game. That was one I missed. Michigan, Notre Dame, Oregon. You mentioned them all. That's my bad. Excuse me. But maybe they go to an Illinois. Maybe they go to Nebraska. Maybe even Iowa at home. One of these games that they're supposed to win, and they just aren't prepared for the Big Ten environment. They for whatever reason just underestimate their opponent. They underestimate Big Ten football. They're not, they're kind of riding the high of the game that they just won a little bit too much. Then I could see them dropping one of those games. And I honestly think that is going to be a bigger problem. I'm decently confident that USC can hang around in against some of these powerhouse teams. And, I think that it's not a horrible bet to say that they could even win one of the 3 games that they're, supposed to lose, quote unquote. But I think the problem is going to be if they drop 1 or 2 of these games that they're supposed to win, because last year there were several games that they were supposed to win that just were too close for the entirety of the game. They should have ran away with it in the first half. They let the team hang around, and then they kind of bad clock management or bad play calling in the fourth quarter coughed it up. And, that happened against Minnesota, that happened against Maryland, that happened against Washington. We're looking at a lot different of season if, those games are kind of tightened up. And I don't know. I think I need to see them consistently win the games they're supposed to win, because it feels like even, in the Lincoln Riley era in the last couple of years, they haven't won those games. And that's honestly been the bigger problem and the bigger thing that the USC fan base has been kind of irritated with over, them staying competitive in the games that they're not supposed to win, because last year they kind of did that. So I think, part of being a powerhouse program is taking care of business in the games that you're supposed to win. So that's going to be the bigger storyline, in my opinion.
Comment from our friend Jeff Rodriguez. They need to beat Illinois to get the season rolling. Jeff, as usual, you're right on the money. I haven't spent a lot of time and a lot of energy thinking about this schedule, because my instant reaction as soon as the schedule came out was, you got to be 9-3. You got to win the 9 you're supposed to, and you take your swings against Michigan, Oregon, and Notre Dame. But if you go 0-3, like, everyone can accept, all right, the program's not quite there yet, but just win the 9 you're supposed to. And I think of those 9, Illinois is definitely number 1 on the list, because Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, that should be an obvious 3-0. And then Michigan State at home in September, like, you really should take care of that. Like, maybe that's a game for a half, but like, USC should definitely be better over 60 minutes. But then Illinois, road trip, and we remember getting tripped up at Michigan and also Minnesota at pretty much the same part of the schedule last season. And then, of course, you have an off week. You get 2 weeks to prepare for Michigan at home. So if you have a win over Illinois, you're 5-0, and that Michigan game gets maximized. And this is a parallel with last season, right? The Minnesota game was so important, because if USC had won the Minnesota game, it would have gone into the Penn State game with only 1 loss, everything to play for. It really punctured the balloon to not go into that Penn State game with only 1 loss. So it's very similar here. You go into that Michigan game, and essentially the double stack, Michigan and Notre Dame. You need to be 5-0 going into those 2 games. And so the Illinois game is the obvious landmine / obstacle, whatever you want to call it. And Illinois had a really good year last year, but Illinois did get to play the soft, gooey, mushy middle of the Big Ten. And of course, Illinois crushed Michigan at home, and Michigan was not very good. So like, there were some teams in the upper end of the Big Ten, or teams that were supposed to be in the upper end of the Big Ten, I should say, that came down. So I think it was less about Illinois rising. It was more about the rest of the field coming down to Illinois' level. Now, credit Illinois for doing what it did. And of course, it beat South Carolina in the SEC in its bowl game. That turned a lot of heads. So Illinois had a magnificent season. But nevertheless, there is legitimate skepticism that Brett Bielema can keep Illinois at that standard, and USC, with the talent it does have, it should feel that it can go into Champaign and beat Illinois, because Illinois needs to prove that it can stay in the top tier of the Big Ten, especially with other teams in the Big Ten rising, that it's going to be hard for Illinois to maintain its place. So really, if you go and get that Illinois win and you're 5-0 going into the Michigan Notre Dame double stack, then this season has a chance to be good. And whether or not the season fulfills its potential, you at least want that Michigan game at the Coliseum. It's going to be such a huge event. You want that Michigan game to mean everything. Now, whether you actually win the game or lose the game, that's one matter. But you want to have the maximum buzz, right? You want those incoming recruits to have a game day at the Coliseum, which is so electric that it kind of seals for them, I want to be at USC, right? So for the Illinois game, important for 2025, also important for 2026, one could argue. So that's another point to make about the Illinois game. Thank you, Jeff Rodriguez, for making that point. So Ethan, other than the Illinois game, and we're keeping this within the 9, not talking about a baseball team. We're just talking about the games that USC is generally expected to win, the games that this program really needs to win in 2025. We've talked through Illinois. The other game of the 9 that you're really, really focusing on and drilling deep on?
I think for me, which there's a great point in here by Russ Campbell, we could end up laying an egg against Illinois, but beating Michigan at home. I think that's a very good point. I think in that situation, if Russ Campbell's hypothetical scenario happens and USC does lose to Illinois but beats Michigan, you kind of resurrect the season a little bit, because you have one loss on your record, but one loss can play in the college football playoff. So then, you're still going into Notre Dame with playoff implications, if that makes sense. You're still going in there with that kind of juice, especially coming off a big win like Michigan. It's like, we beat a great team. We're still in this. We can still, it kind of comes down now to how we perform in this Notre Dame game. And just kind of seeing how that all plays out. I think for me, a big momentum issue is going to actually be that Nebraska game, because I think the Notre Dame game, I think, I go in every year with as much confidence as I can and, excitement and optimism as I can possibly muster. I want to see my Trojans beat Notre Dame. And, I still hold on to the incredible vibes of that game in, during the 2022 season. It was remarkable. Loved watching it, loved every minute of it. But, I think out of all the games on the schedule, that one's the kind of most like, okay, that's a team that's coming off the national championship game. That's a team that has all the advantages in the world right now of the current NIL setup and the current, just how the college football world is with them as an independent, and kind of the incentives that they get as an independent team making the college football playoff, all that stuff. And just what Marcus Freeman is doing, again, it's understandable. In a couple of years, we want to be caught up to Notre Dame, so it becomes less understandable, but again, understandable. So I think whether you're sitting at 1 loss, 2 losses, what I could see happening, to be honest with you, is, even taking Russ Campbell's comment to more of an extreme, I could see them beating Illinois, beating Michigan, going in and losing to Notre Dame, and then that Nebraska game becomes really important, because if you lose to Notre Dame, you have only 1 loss, and then Nebraska, Northwestern, Iowa should be wins. You go into Oregon with 1 loss, and then you have essentially an inside track to a college football playoff spot. You can afford to lose to Oregon in Eugene, which is always a tough game. And, everybody's kind of celebrating the season as a success, regardless of what happens at Oregon, whatever. But Nebraska is a difficult place to play. I mean, all places in the Big Ten are difficult places to play, but there's nothing to do in Lincoln, Nebraska. So they pack that stadium full every single week, and it's always full of Nebraska fans. They're some of the most passionate fans in college football. I remember meeting a lot of them when they came out for the Nebraska USC game, which, they're some of the most passionate fans and some of the most false optimistic fans, they were all there. They all believed that they were going to win. It was great to see USC pull that one out, especially in Jaden Mayava's debut. But I just think they're going to throw a lot of support behind their team. They're going to throw a lot of hostility against whatever team is playing them, regardless of what kind of season that Nebraska's having. I think that Matt Rule's a good coach. I think that program is, kind of reemerging. They're doing a lot better on the recruiting trail. I haven't paid a super close eye on them, but I've been paying a little bit of attention because I have some uncles who are Nebraska fans because they were born in Nebraska. So I kind of pay a little bit of attention to them here and there. So I just feel like they're a program on the rise. Dylan Raiola is obviously really good. So I just think that, and just in general, I think USC's had a momentum problem the last several years. I mean, I think back to 2023, especially, where rolling into that Notre Dame game, they were undefeated. And, there'd been a couple of scares. There was that scare in that Arizona game that went to way too many overtimes. And, Arizona ended up being a good football team, but at the time, people didn't feel like they were. So at the time, it felt like it was a game that we should have run away with. But, kind of rolling into that Notre Dame game, USC was undefeated. And then after that, they won, one more game besides the bowl game. They lost that game, and it felt like the wheels fell off. They lost, it just kind of snowballed. They lost everything else. So if they lose one of these games, whether that's Michigan, whether that's Illinois, whether that's Notre Dame in the middle of the season, they just can't let it snowball to where they're losing these games that they should win at the end of the season. I think out of all of the kind of 9 that are left after that Notre Dame game, Nebraska catches my eye as the most dangerous. Iowa always plays teams tough, but I feel like they're predictable enough that you can kind of prepare. We don't really know how good Dylan Raiola is going to be this season, which is another kind of X factor for Nebraska being potentially good. So I just think that game is the biggest in the 9, other than Illinois, that I could see being a real stumbling block and really derailing the season if they let the kind of momentum problem become an issue.
All right. So, this is June, 2.5 months until the start of the season. We're obviously going to be revisiting some of these topics. We're obviously going to be revisiting some of these games. This is an early look. We're not saying everything there is to say. There will be more to be said when we get into August, we get into camp. Week 1 comes closer. But, certainly worth dropping some observations now, plant some seeds in people's minds, get people thinking about how Lincoln Riley and his staff are going to attack the season. So my question for you, Ethan, my next question for you, I should say, is, all right, you have Missouri State and Georgia Southern. You could also say Purdue. Purdue's like an in-conference cupcake. So really, you have this very soft early part of the season. The opposite of last year, right? You had LSU in the first game. You had Michigan on September 21st. So because you're able to ease into this season, so this is like 2023. They're having Nevada early on, San Jose State
was the first game.
Yeah. Stanford, when Stanford was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
So with the soft early schedule, there are really 2 schools of thought here. One is expose Jaden Mayava to everything. See what he can do, put him in the full range of situations, so that you get to see what works, what doesn't. You get to test things out. You have a fun house, you can experiment. You're not likely to pay any sort of price. Maybe a little bit less so against Purdue because it's a road game and it's a conference game, but certainly for Missouri State and Georgia Southern, you could go with the thought process that, all right, Jaden, we've practiced all summer. Let's see what you can do. You have the keys to the offense. We have faith in you. That's one thought process. That's one avenue. The other thought process, and I highly suspect this is what Jeff Rodriguez would endorse, is, all right, we have a new strength coach in town. Let's focus less on testing out our quarterback. Let's focus more on testing out our new strength coach, our new strength and conditioning program. Let's run the ball a bajillion times. Mayava throws the ball maybe 8 times against Missouri State. We're just going to pound the rock. We're just going to try and establish our standard. We're going to try and create a new identity of physicality. And the added benefit in this thought process, Ethan, and of course I'm going to ask for your input on this, is you can basically keep the playbook entirely under wraps. You can just go pure vanilla. You're just doing, student body right, late 1970s at USC, and you just kind of keep Maava in the shadows. You're basically saying, hey, Jaden, like, you don't need to be the hero right now. You need to learn about the offense, learn about the system. Like, you do not need to put your body on the line. So, like, we're not going to run option plays either. We're going to hand the ball off. We're going to pitch the ball to our running backs against Missouri State and Georgia Southern for sure. And we're just going to play, slobber knocker football, and we don't give our opponents later in the season any sense of, where this playbook is actually going to go. And so, like, kind of just to kind of plan ahead, like, the Illinois game would be the first game under this thought process where the playbook opens up. Because I would say that Illinois is the first really tough game. It's not one of the three giant games, but like it's in that second tier right next to it. Like, I think you can have a vanilla playbook and beat Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, and probably also Michigan State. We could quibble about Michigan State, but certainly the first three games. Like, Purdue is absolutely atrocious. Even if Purdue is moderately better, that's still like going to be a 3-9 team. So, Ethan, do you see what Jaden Maava can do right off the bat? Like give him a taste, let him learn from his mistakes against opponents who are not likely to punish him severely? Or do you keep it all under wraps and you just try and pound the rock and you wait until that midsection of the season, Illinois, Michigan, Notre Dame, to really open up the playbook and begin to expect more from Jaden Maava, especially as a passer? What do you say?
I think you figured out exactly what Jeff Rodriguez is looking for. So you kind of had him figured out there. And he's, putting some more in the chat about he's not a pass hater. He just doesn't understand why when the bright spot of the offense was the run and not the quarterback that they throw 2-3 times in the red zone, which was a big frustration of mine against UCLA. Totally get you there, Jeff. I actually kind of agree with Jeff's last point here. They can air it out, but run at least 50% of the time. I kind of fall somewhere in the middle. I think that the way that Jaden Maava is, you kind of by necessity have to test him out at least a little bit. I think he's not the kind of guy who has shown so much in in-game situations that you're confident enough in him that he can kind of, take a back seat these first 4 games, and then immediately in Illinois, he's going to be ready to go. You have to kind of, with any player, you have to do this, but with him especially, he's a guy who I'm sure looks really good in practice and, has all this potential, all this athleticism. You don't really know exactly what you have until you trot him out there against other defenses that, he doesn't know. That's not, the 11 guys that he competes against in practice every day. He definitely needs to be tested at least a little bit. I do think in those games and just in general, I think more of a reliance on the run would be super helpful. And I do think that with this offensive and defensive line, which we've talked about, they have a lot more size this year, but what they have gained in size, they don't have an experience. So they, letting those guys eat early, definitely a big fan of that idea. And also, I think a little bit in the run game, you're going to still be figuring out who the number one guy is. The running back room is just so deep this year, but there's not really a clear number one guy. Between Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders and Brian Jackson, I could really see any of those 3 guys becoming the number one guy by the end of the year. So I think there's a real chance that they're still figuring out who the number one running back is. And maybe there isn't a number one running back. Maybe it's more of a committee, based kind of situation that they use at USC this season. But I just
let me step in. Let me step in and ask you a pointed question about that precise point. Because here's the thing. With a number one back, like if you have the philosophy or you like just as a coaching staff, you arrive at the view that, hey, we need to be feeding this guy more than others. We have an RB1, we need to feed him. If you have that setup, like how significant an effect do you think that has on how Lincoln Riley and the staff manage the first few games, how they call plays, what their run pass mix is? And of course, we're putting this up against the alternative view. let's do a committee. And if USC does do a committee, should it be, all right, we're going to have these guys as our first half backs, and then we're going to bring in the fresh reinforcements in the second half, or are you spreading it around pretty evenly throughout a whole game? What would you say about those different possibilities, those different potential avenues for managing the running back room and running back snaps and play calls in the first 4 to 5 weeks of the season?
I think that my thoughts on how it will end up is more of the kind of the latter committee scenario where they're more mixed around kind of at different points during the game. I think with this running back room, you have a lot of potential. I mean, Wayman Jordan won essentially the Heisman in JUCO last year, and then Eli Sanders has been a great Mountain West running back, and then Brian Jackson was a great high school running back, showed some flashes in the bowl game against A&M, but none of them are proven. It's kind of the same problem that we've talked about with the defensive line. That's another position group where this is really true. There's a lot of guys who are really big and seem like they have a lot of potential, but none of them are clear number one guys, like I said. So I think they also play to a bit of different strengths as well. I think Wayman Jordan seems like more of a traditional back. Eli Sanders is a guy you can get involved more in the pass game. Again, all of these guys have the potential to do all of these things, but I think it's going to be more, especially in these first few games, it's going to be more of like, hey, like if they decide to do a committee, I think we'll see a bit more of like, hey, let's throw these different guys in different situations, kind of keep them rotating in and out really quickly and just see, how Wayman Jordan does on 1st and 10, how Brian Jackson does on 3rd and short. And then, that'll kind of be the revolving door. I think though the games will give us a clue if there's a clear hierarchy, because I think if, it's kind of obvious if the second unit offense is trotting out there and, Hassan Longstreet is in the game, and then, Brian Jackson comes out alongside him, having not played at all in the first half, and that's a pretty clear indication that he's, lower on the depth chart than the other two guys. So I think if you're going to do a committee, you mix it up more. And I think that kind of should be their approach if they do the committee is that. I think that's a way that you can still keep guys fresh, but also kind of keep the defense guessing, like if they can kind of expect Wayman Jordan to be the only guy for the first half, then they can kind of, lock in and be like, okay, we're going to study this guy for the first half, and then we can expect him to be in the whole first half, and then we can defend the run this way. And then when, Brian Jackson comes in the second half, we can defend the run this way. Whereas if Lincoln Riley is consistently keeping the defense guessing and, putting them in the kind of mindset where they don't know what running back is going to run which specific play, especially in those first few weeks when, if you're still trying to figure it out, you're probably going to put guys in situations that they're not necessarily the strongest in, because you don't want to give teams like Illinois and Michigan indications of, if Brian Jackson is the guy on 3rd and short versus Wayman Jordan's the guy on 1st and 10, you don't want Illinois and Michigan to have that on tape. So maybe you throw them out there in the reverse scenario, and, just get them kind of, because you want, if all your backs are well-rounded, that's the best case scenario, obviously. So yeah, I think, and that's just something also, I really hope that they kind of are okay with doing it a bit more as a committee, because I think in recent years, USC's had some really talented backs that they didn't really utilize. I see Jeff made a comment about how Quentin Joyner didn't have a single run for loss last year. Quentin Joyner was a guy who, when he had opportunities, showed a lot of talent. And for some reason, he just never got the ball. I mean, that was, a problem with the starting running backs as well, but even more so with some of these backup running backs. Like, we had these 5-star running backs. I'm thinking back to years past. There's a guy whose name has slipped my mind, but I remember him playing a couple of the early season games and doing really well. And then just and he was like a 5-star running back out of Texas, I think. But then just not getting in much of the games after that. And then he transferred out somewhere, and, is doing better things over there than he did at USC because he's getting the ball more. So yeah, just kind of, if we have as much talent in the running back room, mix it up a little bit more. Again, even if there is a clear number one guy, because there was clear number one guys these last 3 years, we had 3 great running backs in a row, And, this show knows my opinion on how all of those guys were underutilized. But even if they're, one of these guys separates themselves like that, I don't think there's any harm in letting the younger, less developed, guys that bring a little bit different stuff to the table run the ball a bit more.
All right. Really good discussion in the comments, guys. Jeff Rodriguez, Russ Campbell, Tafaf as well. Really good stuff, guys. One of the points that Russ Campbell makes, and he's alluded to this in some other comments as well along a similar line, but here he says, we definitely should have run the ball more, but our O-line was so erratic. It wasn't as simple as just handing the ball off 10 to 15% more. So, one of the things that Russ really identifies is that last year, USC had a lot of 10-yard carries and a lot of 0-yard carries. It was either feast or famine. It's not as though USC was getting 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. It was getting 0, 10, 0, 10, 0, 10. So the average was around 5, but it wasn't by getting 5 on each carry. It was not a consistent attack. And so really, Ethan, to me, one of the central play calling questions, dramas, is what happens if a first and 10 run gets stuffed and you have 2nd and 9? Does Lincoln Riley stick with the run on 2nd and long to try and get that thing established? It's obviously something he didn't do last season, and here's the nuance. With Miller Moss not a running quarterback, the playbook was constrained. And so I'm sure Lincoln Riley felt for most of last year, 2nd and 9, we don't have a running quarterback. I need to throw. I need to have Miller Moss throwing on 2nd and 9 to get into 3rd and manageable, if not convert the first down. But I think with Maava, you do have something different here. I think that, with Maava, a running quarterback, having 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3 like that, not medium, not really short yardage. Having 3rd and 3 with Maava feels different, Ethan, from 3rd and 3 with Miller Moss. And so, would that significantly change your view of how Lincoln Riley needs to view 2nd and 9 after a first down run gets stuffed? Is it because of Maava, should that give Lincoln Riley the freedom to run on 2nd and long significantly more this year than he did last year?
Tafaf makes a really good point in the chat. You talked about people making good points, but he said Maava didn't even get many running opportunities, though, which was a real head scratcher. Hopefully that's something that USC's been working on a lot this offseason, because, it doesn't really matter because when they made the switch from Miller Moss to Jaden Maava, Jaden Maava's biggest running highlight came in the week 2 cupcake game in garbage time. He didn't really get much opportunity to run the ball, at last year late in games. So they have to actually unlock that part of his game. And, we don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes. Maybe, Lincoln Riley was protecting him from injury, all that kind of stuff. But, he's a young quarterback. He's never played in a big conference. He played at UNLV before. So lots of different things that were potentially going on there. Jeff in the chat says that, his knee was an issue. That's very much possible. Regardless, this year, that can't be an excuse anymore, and they need to get the run more involved. So I think, yes, if they can actually get him running the ball, then that emboldens you to be a little bit more, to run the ball a little bit more on 2nd down. I think also something that kind of popped into my head as you were talking about this was, I think situationally on drives, this kind of matters. I think there were times when, if it's 2nd and long and, you're pinned deep in your own territory and you haven't gotten a first down yet on the drive, maybe you don't, want to run the ball, so you get pinned back for a 3rd and long, and then, you go 3 and out without really gaining any yards and have to punt. But if it's I think what frustrated me was when, they run the ball and it doesn't go anywhere on 1st and goal, and then they, throw twice on plays that, play designs that don't really make any sense, and then they, try to kick a field goal. Maybe Michael Lance misses it because he wasn't a great kicker last year or whatever. But that was the most frustrating to me. So I think I would just I don't think that there's a clear scientific answer to whether, Lincoln Riley is going to run the ball more on second down, if that's wise every time. But I think on a case-by-case basis, I would just like to see, more situationally him running the ball on second down if he can afford it. Like if you're already in opponent territory, if you're already, within field goal range, the kicking game should be a lot better. Last year, they got a guy who was, one of the Mountain West Freshman of the Year, was an incredible kicker at UNLV. So he should be hopefully better than Michael Lance was. But I think hopefully that can be relied on. And in those situations, you see a little bit more, hey, let's trust these guys to run the ball. If you're still trying to pass because, it's 2nd and 11 on your own 24-yard line, then, I wouldn't fault him for that because, you don't want to go 3 and out without ever trying to throw the ball or, put Maava in a situation where it's like 3rd and 9 and the defense knows he's throwing the ball and there's, no other real option there. But I think just situationally, I'd want to see a little bit more of an awareness there of, trusting the running backs in situations where it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that there are some ambiguities and there are some really good debates to have, but I think there's zero debate among the entire USC fan base. You get 1st and goal at the 5, you're hammering that rock. You're staying with it at least on 1st and 2nd. We can talk about 3rd, but 1st and 2nd, you need to be hammering it certainly instead of a 2nd down fade pass. Like we saw way too many of those. So no question about that. And also there were times last season where USC gets into 2nd and 4, 2nd and 3, like 100% of the time, or like 99% of the time, you need to be running the ball on 2nd and 4, 2nd and 3. And the thing we haven't yet brought up here is that, if you're running the ball and you don't have maximum elite depth on defense, you need to be running the ball, if not just, to save your quarterback some work, but also shorten the game, fewer plays, make sure your defense gets to rest as much as possible. That's another dimension to running the ball. And so, USC did not have elite defensive depth last year. That's another reason why Lincoln Riley bailing on the run game, especially in the red zone, was so angering, because he should have been shortening the game, reducing the exposure level for his defense. Like that is another piece of the puzzle. And so if you have the 1985 Chicago Bears, hey, you can take risks on offense. You don't need to worry about shortening the game because you have, the best defense ever created on your side. But if you don't have the elite depth, if you don't have the very, very best, if you don't have an absolute juggernaut, you need to protect your defense. And that means running the ball to shorten the game. Certainly if the scoreboard is neutral or favorable. And it was usually neutral or favorable. USC led in the 4th quarter of nearly every game last season. So not trusting the run game from that vantage point, also a real failure. So really interesting conversation, guys. Jeff Rodriguez, Russ Campbell, Tafaf, really good dialogue tonight. Ethan and I thank you for that. So, hey, you all got the memo. We're now on Thursdays for the summer. Doesn't mean like it's the permanent home for the rest of the year, because I think when we get into the actual college football season, there will be games Thursday night. So, but certainly through August, we're here on Thursdays, 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific. So we're going to see you next week. And, we'll see what happens next in the world of USC football. Kind of quiet right now, but of course we're getting into summer. So we're going to be discussing the schedule. We're going to be doing a little bit deeper dive on some of USC's opponents, to look at them. That's going to be part of our summer content menu with Ethan Inman. So plenty to look forward to here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. A reminder, Mark Rogers has his national show every weekday at 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific. Go watch that. You have the links on YouTube. And at vocfb.com, we're posting the YouTube links and the show summaries for all the various team shows. So you want to just get all your Voice of College Football content, we're putting it on our website, vocfb.com. He's Ethan Inman. I'm Matt Zemek. Thanks for watching USC Trojans Primetime Live. We'll see you next Thursday here at the Voice of College Football.